Pick one of Shakespeare's characters and write an essay, Mr. Terego, said Father Livesey, SDB. I was 12 or so, and from the lowest rung of society, and here was this tall man dignifying me with a formal address. Yes, Father, I replied, and I got to work. I had 1 week. After many dead ends and false starts, I chose Falstaff. I read that he was one of Shakespeare's great comedic figures. I read the 3 plays in which he appears, Henry IV, parts 1 and 2, and Henry V. And I also read what the great literary critics had said about him. Of course, these were the days of actual libraries, accessible only by public bus, and the Dewey Decimal Cataloging System, the Google of its day. I soon discovered to my dismay that Falstaff was obese and vain and a coward. He spent his evenings carousing and drank to excess. He was also a thief. But it was his belief that soldiers were just cannon fodder that irked me the most. Falstaff says this about soldiers to his king: good enough to toss, food for powder, they'll fill a pit as well as better men. Well, I'm a descendant of generations of soldiers who had sacrificed plenty in the horrific 20th century for king and country, and I had heard first-hand accounts of the horrors of war and the arrogance of officers. I had been at this school as a scholarship boy for about a year by now, and I already knew that I was free to try to prove any point I believed in. So I wrote in my essay that I disagreed with the likes of Hazlitt and Lamb, the great literary critics, who seemed to think Falstaff was a hilarious buffoon. I, however, hated Falstaff, and whatever he stood for, and said so in my initial essay. A week later, Father Livesey sat down with me and a group of my fellow students to review what we had all written about our Shakespeare characters. You might think that he had written some comments on the paper I had submitted. He had not. Instead, the Socratic dialogue began with multiple questions. I remember them clearly. Who are your sources? Hazlitt and Lamb and Shakespeare, Father. I see. Did you consider that Shakespeare was agreeing with your point simply by making Falstaff so outrageous? Implicitly condemning him by making him such a caricature? No, Father. Are there any other characters in Shakespeare that are exaggerated for the purpose of making a point? I don't know, Father. Did you know that the use of exaggeration is a common literary device? Yes, Father. It's called hyperbole, exaggeration for the purpose of effect. Good. Well done, Mr. Terego. Now I think you should rewrite the essay, bearing this conversation in mind. Back at the library, looking for some exaggerated language, I discovered the bard had used plenty. After Shakespeare's Macbeth murdered his King Duncan, he felt guilty about the blood on his hands and asked himself dramatically, will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand? Macbeth answers his own question. No, this hand will make the green sea red. This was one of many light bulb moments. Father Livesey, through his interrogation, made me discover the value of thinking things through. Discovery intoxicated me, and it has ever since. I rewrote the essay incorporating this new example of hyperbole to further make my case, and once again submitted it. What followed again was not a grading of my essay by my teacher, but yet more questions from my teacher and my fellow students. I wrote and I rewrote essays each week for 6 more years on all kinds of subjective topics, on average 4 or 5 times each, before my work finally was deemed worthy by me and my teacher in that order. At which point we agreed that I could write the initials QED at the bottom of my work. No grades, just these 3 letters. I had argued my point, I had used my thinking skills, prodded by questionings from my teacher and my fellow students, and we finally all deemed the essay worthy. I had proved my point. QED, quod erat demonstrandum. Thus it has been demonstrated. Thanks to a 2,400-year-old learning and teaching method, I felt respected. I felt like I owned my learning. I knew I had honed my thinking and persuasive skills. I had also learned the value of research. I had learned to think deeply. I was at the center of my own learning. It was a gift that has kept on giving. I want others to receive this gift. If this seems like an appropriate way for you to teach and for your students to learn, try it. It's actually quite simple. 2 hours and you will become an expert, and more importantly, so will your students. Isn't that the vocation of all teachers? To make my point, consider this. My teachers would frequently respond to my questions by asking me, whatever makes you think I'm here to teach you? What I had realized that it was within my power to ideate. That made me free. I had choices. I had power to make my own decisions and to learn from my own mistakes. I was not being directed. I was not being coerced. I was not being shamed. And because I was in charge of my own destiny, I was not being medicated. I felt safe. And I learned then, and I am still learning now, decades later. And all this is the natural condition of all humans. Thanks for watching. My name is Alex Terrego. Let's connect on social media and watch for my ideation game coming soon. Thank you.